So last article is actually another technical kind of article, short-term cash flow forecasting. It's the metric of the month for CFOs. So he kind of goes into talking about basically how much time it should take you to do a short-term cash flow, and then kind of what a forecasting foundation is, real accurate understanding of your cash flow inflows and outflows. So they talk about kind of the stumbling blocks to getting that going again with post COVID-19. And so he kind of goes through the steps here on how to understand that. And he's talking about calibrating your forecast to 30, 60, 90 days out kind of. And so I kind of like to get Ty's input here because he's been doing a lot of short-term forecasting and kind of get his idea or kind of his checklist maybe for everybody out there on what these important short-term cash flow hiccups would be coming out of, or in kind of a re-emerging from the global lockdown would be.
Yeah, I think I would defer a little bit to Charlie because I think he actually has more experience with truly short-term cash flow forecasting. In the sense that typically, I mean, when we're advising clients, if you actually need like the kind of short-term cash flow forecasting that tells you, here's how much cash we're going to have every day of the week, for the next week, and then we need to do another short-term cash flow forecast for next week. I see companies that get themselves into that situation all the time, but I truly believe, I mean, there's a lot of systematic problems with the business that lead to that scenario, and that's not where we want to be. I think that's not, you don't want your company to be in a scenario where they have to do that kind of short-term cash flow forecasting. I mean, if you don't have the working capital that you can basically forecast cash flow on a monthly basis and revise from there if it's not right, and be okay, you're kind of in a world of hurt, and it ends up burning up a lot of, in my experience, it does burn up a lot of time and resources to try to maintain these short-term cash flow forecasts. And I think this article was almost written as a rebuttal to my attitude on this, because what the article was focusing on is how top performers can do these short-term cash flow forecasts in a very short period of time, and how important that is that you can churn it out in a short period of time. Yeah, okay. I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, if you're in that zone and you have to do that, the fact that you can do it very quickly is going to be a very important skill. But still, I mean, if your cash flow cycle is such that you're worried about running out of cash on a daily basis and you need to do something like this, that's not a good place for the company to be. And so we don't practice in that. We don't practice in that area very often. We run into it. It happens, but not very often. But I know Charlie's had it happen with client work that he's done.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about things I've done to try to help that. Because yeah, like you said, it's not where you want to be. It's not the plan that anybody wants to be in, but you often find yourself there. And so in the situation that I was in, the things that I found helpful that are like practical advice to people who are in that situation was basically two things. It was getting integration from other people. A lot of times the problem was that there were other people in the company who knew what mattered, who knew what was going to be spent, or who knew what money was going to come in. And so getting a system that integrated them so that they could easily and effortlessly inform that process without having it be burdensome, it was kind of the first thing. And then the second thing is to just try to think about everything as an equation that has variables that you can define. So like if you're looking at what you're going to spend total in payroll, you got to think about, well, what are the different factors that go into that total cost, and how much of those can I systematically lay out so that at the end of the day, it's more a question of just reviewing those assertions rather than trying to start from a really zoomed out perspective that isn't auditable. And so I think with those two things, with getting the right people put into tools, like for us, a lot of the times it was just a Google shared sheet. You start in a Google sheet and get other departments so they can type numbers into it. And then you start asking the questions, what's going to impact cash flow, right? What do we think about those things? And then the more you just kind of you let them take their part in it, and they have, variables that they feel matter. And so I think that through doing that, you can get to a pretty good system. But like Ty said, it's no substitute for the long term. It's more of a band-aid for if a company is tight and needs to just get through, needs to know what's going to be in the bank in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Then that's probably the best way to go about it. But it's always a challenge, and it's never a fun game to be in, I'll tell you.
Yeah, and the paradox of this is that you need somebody who's pretty experienced and business savvy, like a Charlie, which is not a cheap resource. So when you're burning through time with experienced business savvy resources, because you don't have money, right? That's why this is happening. You don't have money, so you're having to forecast your cash flow on a daily or weekly basis. But in order to do that, you need somebody who's really plugged into the business and knows how to do this and has, which is an expensive resource. So there you are, right? I mean, you don't have any money, but you're somehow going to pay for an expensive resource to try to keep you going above water, and that's just super problematic.
Well, and you've also got the question of like, how actionable is the knowledge that you get out of that process? Because if you get to the end of it and you find that you can't make any kind of meaningful decision from it, if the forecast says you're going to be broke in 2 weeks and you don't have an answer for that, then that isn't going to necessarily solve it. So a lot of times that forecasting process just ends up being, like I said before, but a band-aid for a more meaningful discussion, like you're saying. Yeah.